I just traded for a set of full-length climbing sticks, so what better time to go over all the things that I do to silence my hunting setup? So to start off, in my opinion, there's not one single tree stand on the market that's quiet enough to hunt with right out of the box. There's definitely some design and manufacturing features that can make one stand quieter than another, but still, none of them are up to the precise level of stealth that I want when I'm going into the woods. I think it really helps to analyze your setup and determine different times where you're more susceptible to get noise, and then go in and find the root cause and then fix them. For instance, you could have noise walking through the woods. Maybe your strap loosened up on your seat a little bit, and then with every step, you get a little clank. Maybe your gear loosened up and it's bouncing around. You can most certainly have noise while climbing the tree and hanging the stand. That's the biggest thing for me. So many of my setups, especially when I'm hunting mobile on public land, are very close to deer beds. And one unnatural noise can make the difference between the deer walking past before dusk or waiting until after dark to leave the sanctuary of its bed. And of course, you could have noise while sitting in the stand. Maybe it's your boot brushing up against the platform cable, or when you're pulling your bow up, you hit it against the side of the platform, or just a little bit of squeaking when you're maneuvering on your stand. I've seen the most benefit by far from fixing climbing noise, so let's focus on that first. The big thing with climbing noise is component contact, whether it's two sticks hitting one another, a buckle hitting a stick, a buckle hitting a platform, that type of thing. So the very first thing I do is completely cover all of my sticks and all of my cables. When I first started off hunting, I wrapped all my sticks with electrical tape, and then on top of the electrical tape I used some of that camo cloth tape that you can get at like Dick's or Fleet Farm for under 10 bucks. It worked okay for a while, but the big problem with it was it started to break down. After a season or two, the tape started to peel, and then after the third year, it actually wore through the material on the tape to the point where it was just adhesive and it would get really tacky whenever I would touch the stick. Since then I've switched to Stealth Outdoors. They have a product called Stealth Strips. And just a quick disclaimer, I'm not affiliated with the company at all, so this is just my opinion on the product. The Stealth Strips themselves are very soft with a micro suede finish. It's kind of like felt but a bit smoother. It has some thickness to it, which is where a lot of the vibration damping comes from. And the adhesive is much better than the electrical and cloth camo tape I used to use. In fact, here's a stick I left on my buddy's land the last time I hunted there. It ended up sitting in the woods for over a year. The color of the camo has been bleached by the sun, but structurally it hasn't changed. Stick around to the end of the video and I'll show you the steps that I use to put those strips on cleanly. I've seen the spray-on silencing material too, and although I've never used it, I did pick up the can once, and the first thing that came to mind was how heavy the can was. I think that if you were to spray down all of your stand and sticks with that material, it would probably add more weight to your system than the tape solution would. And I don't know whether or not they would hold scent any better or worse. All I know is that this system works very well for me and I'm sticking to it. There's three things you can do for the buckles. One is to use the Stealth Strips, cut into sections and apply it after roughing up the metal with coarse sandpaper. Two is to superglue felt strips on in the same manner, which takes a little bit more work but works just as well. And three is to use bicycle tubing. I'll show how to do that at the end too. Of the three, the bicycle tubing might do the best job for noise reduction, but it also wears down the fastest. By the time you get to hanging the stand, there's less that could go wrong in terms of noise, so I don't apply the strips as liberally as I do on the sticks, but I do make sure to cover that buckle, because that thing has ruined a couple of hunts for me. Let's talk about noise while walking in. The main source will either be from your seat bouncing off the platform, or your gear bouncing. The best way to prevent the first is to try and make noise with your seat. Tilt the seat and tap it around, then identify where the noise is coming from, and either wrap it with rubber bicycle tubing, felt, stealth strips, basically whatever you want to use. Eventually you get to the point where you can't make any sharp clicks, no matter which way the seat is positioned. For gear noise, my best tip is to use bungee cords. The elastic properties will help absorb the forces, and as a result, your stuff stays in the same spot. With a tight, non-stretch strap, even if it loosens up a 1/16 of an inch, your stuff will rattle. So I always lay my sticks down, then my pack or extra clothes, then the bungees. Doing this, I never ever have any walking noise other than footsteps or branches breaking, that type of thing. Now, noise in the stand. This is where stand design does make a difference. If you're buying a $50 lock-on special from Fleet Farm, don't expect to have the same performance as a high-end stand with a cast platform. I've used this same tree stand for 9 years, and for a while, Lone Wolf was the only company protected by their patents who could make a cast aluminum platform. Now there's finally some competition on the market. I remember a couple of times when I considered picking up a cheap stand to leave up on some private land that I rarely ever get to hunt because of distance. Then I tried one out. Last fall, early November in Minnesota, probably 5 degrees, no wind, no leaves, just a quiet morning. I walked into an area my buddy said he had a stand in. I was carrying this stand just in case because I wasn't sure if the stand would be stolen or not, and it was a long walk. The stand was there, and I climbed up into it. After about 60 seconds though, I was back on the ground and climbing the tree next to it. I literally could not move on that stand without it creaking in the cold. And then I realized why people fork out big bucks for nice stands. So other than design, make sure all of your nuts and bolts are snug and rub your nylon washers with bowstring wax. That's just good maintenance work. I like to wrap the outer rim of the platform with 5/16 inch camo rope. It does two things. First, it helps prevent noise in pulling my bow up or hanging the stand. But more than that, I can feel that thick rope through my boot. It lets me know where the edge of the platform is, even when my eyes are fixed elsewhere and I'm trying to maneuver. You could almost think of it as a safety feature in that regard. The other thing on the stand is the cables. Depending on your boot material, they could potentially squeak against the coating on the cables. It's never happened to me, but I know people it has happened to. Stealth Outdoors makes a cable silencer product designed solely for that issue. It's basically just a smaller cutout of their stealth strips. I decided to put some on mainly to be preventative. So as promised, here's how I apply the stealth strips. They're conveniently sized to match a full-length Lone Wolf stick, mainly because noise freaks and Lone Wolf owners for the longest time have tended to be the same people. But they'll wrap perfectly around any stick manufactured with 1-inch square extrusion, and you can always cut the strips to fit anything you want. I put them on my camera arm, release, and my tripod. Start by removing all the hardware off the stick. I like to reassemble it next to the stick and keep a fully assembled stick nearby for reference in case I forget the order of the washers. Speaking of washers, those big 1-inch nylon washers serve a purpose being in contact with the metal. You need to cut the stealth strip around them along with all of the holes. The backing on the adhesive is cut into one wide and one narrow strip. Line up the narrow side of the backing over the bottom of the stick and tape its edge along the center line. Look at where the large washers are located on the bottom of the assembled stick. Mark large semicircles around those holes and small semicircles around all the other holes. Cut out all the semicircles, remove the narrow strip of backing, and stick the strip onto the stick. Roll the rest of the strip tightly around the stick and mark semicircles adjacent to the holes. They will complete the circular cutouts at the bottom of the stick. Don't peel the other piece of backing from the adhesive just yet. You also need to cut holes on what would be the top side of the stick. To get placement for those, I like to roll the strip tight and slide one of the bolts around on the surface. You can feel the depression where the hole is, so twist and push the bolt in that spot. That will score the edge of the hole. Then you can use a marker to draw 1-inch circles for the nylon washer holes and cut everything out with scissors. Here's what the strip should look like now. The tedious work is done. Now it's just a matter of removing the large piece of adhesive backing and carefully rolling and sticking the strip in place. You should find that all the holes line up about perfectly. Another bonus, if you're using 1-inch square sticks like the Lone Wolf sticks, is that you have just enough width to fit the perimeter of the stick without extra overlap. Reapply the hardware and you're done. You might have issues with the stick stacking together due to the extra thickness added by the strips. There's a couple of things you can do to fix the issue. One is to mark the problem areas and then singe the micro fleece with the lighter. The other option is to score and remove the area causing interference. I only do this on one side because I like a snug fit between the sticks. You could of course mark and cut out that same section before applying the stick, just like you did for cutting out the holes. The bicycle tube buckle silencers. Compatible tire diameter isn't important, but the compatible tire width range from 1 3/4 to 2 1/4 inch, like shown here, seems to fit pretty well around the buckle. Cut a 4-inch section of the tubing and pre-stretch it a bit, just like you would pre-stretch a balloon before inflating it. Pull the long strap out of the buckle, leaving just the metal portion in the short loop. Wiggle, stretch, and pull the tubing onto the buckle. It takes a little bit of work. And we definitely don't want the tubing compressing onto the release tab, so take a knife and score around its edge. Since the tubing is under tension, it will spring back some once you cut it. Turn the buckle over and cut out a rectangle over the hole in the bottom. Be careful here not to touch the webbing with the knife. Feed the long end of the strap back through the buckle and you're done. You can of course readjust and trim the tubing to your liking. Even though you see some exposed metal from the top view, if you were to tap the buckle with something large, the rubber on top of the release tab is thick enough to absorb the blow. When cinching the strap onto the stick for stacking and carrying, you can see right away how much silencing your buckles can really help out. Make sure to check out the DIY Sportsman website for more content on hunting, fishing, gear, and how-tos, and follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.